All right, well, welcome everybody to this third lecture in this series on the shoulders of giants. I'm James O'Connor. I'm Professor of Radiology both at Manchester and at the Evis Sala in London, and it's great to welcome so many people to this event. So this event has got two speakers. So firstly, Professor Evis Sala from the University of Cambridge is going to give a presentation covering aspects of academia and industry collaborations. And then for the second half, we're going to have a conversation between Evis and with Kieran Murphy, who's just recently retired as the CEO of GE Healthcare. And they're going to spend another 15-20 minutes discussing certain aspects of collaboration. And then finally, we'll open up to some questions. During the section where Evis and Kieran discuss aspects of collaboration, it is encouraged that people can ask questions at that point and chip in. If you do so, please do by raising your hand or by putting a question in the chat so I can come to people in a relatively orderly manner. So without further ado, I'll move on to Professor Sala. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, James. I'm sharing the screen now, so okay. So I hope you're seeing the full screen. Okay, super. Right, okay, so thank you everyone for joining. So I was going to be quite practical and share with you all an example of many that we have as a successful collaboration between us and academia, in this case, GE Healthcare. And this is quite dear to me because it's a collaboration on integrated care rather than just a pure only imaging collaboration. So I'm going to start with where we are when we're in a multidisciplinary team, a tumor board meeting. So this is a room where everybody gets together to discuss the patients to make treatment decisions. This is what happens now. So we all prepared, but we all kind of maybe over talk over each other. You know, it's too many questions. There is not much law and order. Of course, there is a chairman or a chairwoman. But by and large, there's not an integrated care as such. So we've got to move away from this. Why? Because I don't think it's ideal for the patient, but also because it's time consuming and we don't actually learn moving forward what we decided on kind of previous patients. So this is where we are in this kind of somehow kind of organized chaos. And why? So why? Because patients are complicated. Now we have, it's wonderful, we have many treatments available to them. So this is a patient with ovarian cancer, which is miraculously survived, she's still alive, from 2012 to 10 years. And the reason for that is, undergone various types of chemotherapy, some of them are experimental on trial basis, some of them standard of care, and then various incidents of surgery. And of course, imaging is integral to that. At every time point, there has been imaging. So how on earth one can summarize all this very quickly at an MDT or even at a patient consultation? So this is the problem. So we've got a problem that we need to sort out. I don't believe that this could have been done just by the academia. It needs such a collaboration with industry. So what we've done in academia, we're great at innovation. Okay, so we've created this radiogenomics framework at Cambridge, which actually doesn't start with the reconstructed images per se. It starts with the raw data. So we now have the pipeline in place, and as you can see here, and CETA beautifully sits in it's a pillar actually where the images from various centers also fit in. Then we have a pipeline for reconstruction, automatic segmentation, and sub-tissue segmentation, which I'll come to, and then the whole sort of integration as well. So research setting still. Also, we've made strides forward, and now we have got an algorithm in place, AI algorithm in place to actually do this treatment prediction, outcome prediction. This is just the first results. We had our sort of first cohort of 100 patients. You see here, it's a complicated cohort because they go through multiple cycles of treatment as our patients, our exemplar patients. We integrate data from imaging, clinical data, obviously ascites, CA125, but also ctDNA, which our patients now have routinely collected. We have now in place an ML framework, machine learning framework, that integrates such data with a proper training set, holdout validation, and external validation set. And surely, as we expected, more data sources you integrate, less error you are, so it's more accurate, so the error goes down in terms of prediction of true response. So we know now that by integrating imaging, and by imaging I mean the radiomics data, on a disease which is multi-site, so heterogeneity plays a role, then you reach a better outcome. So again, this is still on the research domain. So let me just go back to that particular patient that we looked at. It's always going back to the patient because that's where the problem to be solved is. So at some point in her treatment, she was on a combination of olaparib and Bev. So, and this is the time point 1 at that's the trial entry, and then point 2 CT. Overall, the disease in the left upper quadrant has probably unchanged for we know ovarian cancer is a coelomic disease, so it's very ill-defined, very difficult to resist, and as well as disease around the liver. However, we have a lesion here, which is one of the target lesions in the lesser sac. So this lesion, if you look at it, is actually increased in size. So if you go by the RECIST measurements in this case, you'd say this patient is progressing. However, if you look at the phenotype of the lesion, on imaging, you'd see that actually this lesion, yes, it is becoming bigger, but it's actually becoming more fluidy, which you expect from the treatment with Bev. So actually, this patient is responding very well to chemotherapy at some of the sites, and the CA125, it had gone down, but there is a delay in about 2 or 3 weeks for the CA125 to show that. So getting all data together, we actually call this patient of a partial response, which indeed was the case. But we can't keep doing this on a sort of a patient-to-patient base when we have these time pressures, when we are doing the clinical reads, on our everyday clinical practice. We have to have a system which everything is integrated, and then this care is delivered to the whole cohort of patients, not in the centers of excellence, but then brought out in the region when actually those pressures are even more acute. So what we wanted to do is create a integrated multidisciplinary dashboard, which was simple, it was focused, and it was also, we could contextualize. And here is one of our other patients with stage 3C ovarian cancer, for example. We know the BRCA type is a wild type. We know that the ctDNA is actually going down, so she's responding by the circulating tumor marker. We can then visualize her tumor, the pattern of change of the tumor. We can biopsy different areas where radiomics are different. Then we can potentially get different genomic signatures, and this is all incorporated. But we can also dynamically track those changes over time, along with the ctDNA and along with the CA125, and we can see what has changed in those lesions over time, as the case I described you. This is actually a second case with similar, more sort of cystic changes, although the lesion is bigger. And then we can build on bioflags. We know that actually, despite being bigger, those lesions are actually responding because the cystic component is actually being bigger, larger. The ctDNA is going down, so it's less circulating tumor markers. So then it's a partial response rather than actually disease progression, and we can dynamically track this. But not only that, we can actually look at our patient in the context of other patients which have similar profiles, and then we can make the system learn and actually improve the prediction over time. And then what we have generated, then we can then apply to the other hospitals. But that's where the academia kind of stops short. Okay, so we have all these visions. We can do this fantastically well as we're doing this in Cambridge. We can resolve all the special radiogenomics, or we can do those guided biopsies. We can replace the trial biopsies with imaging being a virtual biopsy. We can integrate it together, and we have started engaging both the clinicians and the patients. However, we want to reach the point that we can actually deliver this to the patient. And that's where we think that partnership in industry is essential, because something that the academia will take years, if at all, to actually put it in the clinical practice, that partnership will take much less time. And this is one of the collaborations we have with GE Healthcare, that we've now trialing our prototype in ovarian cancer, and hopefully we'll have a product down the line to actually use it in certain centers to start, and then really democratize it out and just really put it in the other smaller hospitals, because I think we have to decentralize care. Care should be next to the patient. Patient shouldn't come next to the care. So this is my sort of opening slides. There'll be no more slides, but I want to kind of then open the point for discussion with Kieran, and obviously James is moderating, to actually see how we can really take this collaboration to be a successful one, not just with Cambridge, obviously, but all over. So that was me.
Okay, thanks, Evis.
Stop sharing. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you. So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, so if we just maybe start then with this example you've shown. So obviously, just to take a step back here, one of the issues around biomarker translation and imaging biomarker translation in particular, but this is true of everything, is, we all get these, we get some good papers which suggest that something we've developed in one lab, or maybe in a few labs working together, looks like it might have some promise, but then these biomarkers get stuck at that point, and it's very hard to get them from that point through multi-center studies and through to some sort of clinical decision making, either in a research setting or for individual patients in healthcare. So Evis, just to understand then, so with the example you've just shown, is that something that has just been done within your group in Cambridge, or has that been taken further into the multi-center setting?
So the example just showed to you that 100 patient actually involves the BARTs as well. So it's 2 centers. But what we're working on is the multi-center via NCTA. That's where NCTA has been absolutely amazing. Is actually getting the whole ICON-8 trial, which is a neoadjuvant chemotherapy trial, which has 20+ centers. Because we have to, I mean, I know it's, something I always say, and I get a lot of criticism, but I do believe in it, so I'm going to say it again, is that we're never going to have the same scanners, the same protocols, the same version in every single hospital. So let's just forget about it and move on. We have to find ways that with what we have, we can really collaborate. And then there are ways now that thanks to the AI and the computation, we can find those robust biomarkers.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, so although there's data from 2 sites, this is something which has effectively taken place with your research group. You've developed something which has promise potentially, but it's not yet gone to the stage where this is being replicated in other labs independently, for example.
No, but I mean, I don't think you need to replicate in another lab. You need to make this multi-center. Okay.
Right, well, so let's come to that. So I just want to get for people a sense of where this particular example is, or maybe on the roadmap. Right. So bearing that in mind, then, at what point is an industry collaboration useful here, and what form might an industry collaboration or collaborations take? So I think maybe if each of you were to address them, and maybe Evis, maybe you might start by saying, well, as the person who's developed this, what you might be looking for in industry, and then maybe Kieran from a point of view of industry as to what makes this attractive or potentially unattractive at the moment. And then if it is the point at which it potentially is attractive to work on, how you might start to do that. So maybe just really briefly, Evis, why do you want industry? And then Kieran, are you interested? And if so, what would you do about it?
So first of all, let me just say you don't need industry all the time. So it's important to choose that application that you actually need industry. You shouldn't collaborate for the sake of having a collaboration, because then it's a bit of a recipe for maybe failure. So it's important to identify that application that you really think industry is important. And I think in that case, it is important because, as I said, we've got a piece of research which we know it works. It works. It's validated on another center, but I want to get this into a product that I can use in patients. It's not, we do that at the background, and then a PhD student or researcher will do the generation of the data. No, I want this to happen instantaneously as the report is done, integrated, and then at the MDT, the data is integrated. So that piece is impossible to do as a researcher, or at least,
Okay, and so I agree about that point. So Kieran, let's come to you then. What makes you want to jump onto this now, or would you want something more in place first of all?
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to be on here, James. I just want to say up front, have retired from GE. Any remarks I make are from my own opinion and independent of GE at this point. It allows me to be more more independent of you, perhaps. I think Evis made some great points, which were shown in the lecture. We definitely don't want to get into collaborations for the sake of it. There are bad reasons to collaborate, like hospital or academic centers want discounts on equipment, or from an industry standpoint, they want to place equipment, and we've made huge strides, I think, in recent years from a compliance point of view to make sure that those things don't happen, and that's very positive. What we look for, and you see this in the example, we're looking for work where algorithms can be trained, where there is heterogeneity of data, there's a high volume of data. And so and that's the point I think that Evis made, the more volume and heterogeneity that you have, the better chance that you can have an algorithm or machine learning that's going to be predictive. And so what we're trying to do generally within industry is to develop platforms, ensure that algorithms which we're trying to develop have real application in real cases, and the only way that can be validated is by the use of these things and the testing in the real world. That cannot happen in a shop like a GE or other. It has to be used with real data, and of course access to that data is critical, and we can go on and talk about that a little bit. That whole access to data point can cause these things to slow down, but what we kind of look for is a situation where there is great science, great vision, great understanding, and I think that vision slide you showed at the end is indicative of that. A real forward-thinking view within a center that says we're willing to work with industry to make these things work. We want to understand what you're developing so that we can test it, train algorithms, and so on.
Okay, thank you. And so, and I think it's important to emphasize, I think, for a lot of people from an imaging biomarker background, about the importance of getting some sort of product that can actually be used as a tool, because I think often that just simply doesn't happen. But if we don't have that available, then it's a problem. Now, can I ask you? So you're not GE anymore. So let me ask you this then. So let's say this particular idea has legs and it works, and you produce, and you're involved to some extent in funding this, in producing some sort of app or some sort of product that becomes available. Let's maybe say, let's look at something more complicated. Let's pretend this is an MR related tool. Does it start to become difficult then when GE is investing, and some of the data is from GE scanners, but some of it's from Siemens scanners and some of it's from Philips scanners? Do you start to potentially get any problems there, or maybe turn that question around? How do you work appropriately to avoid any problems there?
Well, we fully understand that anything that we put on a platform, and in the case of GE, was Edison as a platform that can distribute some of these applications. They just have to be applicable to any situation out there where an image is created, and it's irrelevant and should be. It's agnostic with regard to the equipment, and that's also, I think, there is some progress being made on industry standards, and I think that's the way this has to go ultimately, is that there's an industry standard, and as long, the distribution of these things for global application in due course has to be the way this is going to go, because the way I saw it, I'm a lay person, by the way, so I'm just trying to apply some business logic to this in a simple way. If we take the different organs of the body, the different types of disease, the different types of cancers, the different modalities of imaging, the application of genomics, we're almost looking into an infinite space here, and so maybe this is instructive for the people on the call. I hope it is. What we tend to find is that people that come up with that rifle shot, you say, well, I have a biomarker that's going to, or an application that's going to be really of high use in imaging, in pet use and pet for ovarian cancer. I'm going to commercialize this independently. The reality is that's a rifle shot. It's very, very difficult to scale that. And so what the industry needs to do is ensure that these things get scale through a volume of applications, and that, as each one in turn is sort of regulated in a way so that when they appear on a platform, they can have real life applicability, and over time, the validity of each of these applications continues to learn and increase in accuracy. And that's really, it's a bit like the driverless car. That's where we need to go in terms of fully understanding how we can make these things more valid over time. Is that fair? Would you say, Evis?
No, yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And from the sort of the pure imaging, so if you look at the imaging point of view only, the reason, so CT, I know we do a fair amount of PET CT in oncology and MRI, but actually the main bulk of oncology imaging is going to be CT and remain CT for a bit of a foreseeable future, because we're not only thinking of the excellent centers that have PET MR, right? So I think that's why we're focusing on a modality which is a bit more reproducible, at least than the MRI, but also it's more available, more accessible. And then you can then sort of move on to the others. So if you did an application, obviously on endometrial cancer, there will be MRI. Depends what you use for the disease you have. But also to the point that Kieran raised, now the industry is actually trying to work on interoperability. So platforms are interoperable, not only with between them, but also a big thing is with the radiotherapy planning, right? So there, which is very important, we're going to see that there may be, once you acquire the imaging, the planning is kind of designed and prescribed, and then a seamless move to actually the treatment planning system. So I think we are going to see interoperable platforms, because which is the way forward.
Okay, so let me move on to another question, but just before I do, just remind people that if they want to chip in, please either raise your hand or preferably actually put something in the chat function, and then I can go to individuals in turn, and they can ask questions or make a point if they want to. So the next question I was going to ask, which I think you suggested beforehand, was almost like, what does a successful collaboration look like? But I want to make this slightly more nuanced. I want to ask what a successful collaboration looks like, but I also want to say, what does a potential proposed collaboration that is clearly one to avoid for industry, Kieran, what does that look like? And then out the ones that look as if they are worth investing and starting in, what ones become successful and what ones that looked originally as if they could well be successful then fall flat on their faces? Can we almost think of these three categories: the straight away it's not going to work, or I'm not interested in it, the one that ends up being a great success, and then the ones that start looking good but then go wrong at some point?
Well, that's hope I get this in the right order. First of all, I think the ones that clearly are not going to work is usually, I think, where we see an individual that has a very strong idea without having a supporting team, and both with underneath that person's command and also supportive team in management, and so because we have fallen into the trap, I can tell you, many times, where you meet a gifted individual who has a brilliant idea, and it is a great idea, but unfortunately, to fully validate and get it up and running, that requires a village on both sides, in both our teams and the academic center side. And so from my point of view, then, where they're successful is you have a very clear thesis from somebody who's leading a group of people. They have a very, very focused concept they want to test. It's very focused, integrating different sources of data, imaging, genomics, and so on, for ovarian cancer, using CT, for example, or PET-MR. That has a much better chance, because then we can put specific modality people on it from an industry point of view. We can get digital applications where we know exactly that it's going to be, how it's going to be positioned. And in the reference to it takes a village, I think you tend to find that you require teams on both sides who maintain regular contact. You have a steering group, you have an operational team, and you have a sort of worker bees. And I think that the third piece, when things look like everything should be right, but they actually turn out not to work, generally speaking, it's a breakdown from my standpoint anyway, that there isn't truth spoken at other reviews, where people kind of hide the fact that we're not making progress. We may not know why, but that effort isn't put in during meetings and reviews to problem solving. And there's a sort of very pleasant exchange, which really doesn't uncover the potholes in the road. And that's the secret, I think, is total transparency. You were closer to this collaboration than I am. Have I represented some of this correctly, Evis?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to say lack of focus. If you're going to spread and say, we want to do everything from this to this, and actually, I think it's actually essential to start with one. It might be the most difficult type of tumor, my most easy one. It doesn't matter. It's just where you have that combined team science expertise, okay? You've got somebody, but it's a team science that counts rather than just one person. And I think also having a vision of how do you translate it to the other potential tumors, okay? So when you think about, yes, you'd say, well, this is, yes, it is a silent killer in this beta ovarian cancer, but why that? Well, think about it. There'll be a lot of tumors that end up with peritoneal carcinomatosis in a metastatic setting, right? So there'll be the bladder, the stomach, the pancreas, So this immediately, once you've worked it out, of course, the biology is different. So you're going to have different ctDNA, different tumor markers, but the principle, once you've got that sort of product, that product can be then changed and adapted to actually work with other cancer types, and then you can go and be kind of almost like a cancer agnostic, because then you can say, okay, we're going to develop that for all the BRCA mutation, then it's going to be a BRCA sort of pan application, a bit like a basket trial in the trial world. So I think that focus is important, and the team science for sure. The other thing is you've got to, as much as you know each other, and it's, as Kieran said, it's nice over beer or this and this, you've got to know each other and maybe kind of have some heated discussion with the engineers, with the people that say, well, hang on a minute, I don't understand quite, because don't forget, we know what we know very well, and we presume the computational engineers know, but they don't. And how would they know? And vice versa. So spending the time to work out what the problem is, what do you do currently, what do you want to see, and really being patient with each other. And kind of coming from someone which is kind of rather impatient in general, I think this has been a wonderful way to actually look and say, well, building patience, I think it serves right to actually start solving those problems. And also what I would say is the key to success or unsuccessful, you can turn it the way you want. It's actually that I would say, there are two sets of opinions here, but mine is you've got to involve the hospital IT in the beginning. Some would say, no, let's do the first part first. I think that is crucial, having the hospital IT, because there are certain bottlenecks that are going to be there. And they're going to be sometimes the pains of actually getting it to the patient. So I think some of the systems are archaic, right? So you have to account for that. So you've got your engineering team from let's say the industry part, whatever company that's going to be, they've got to talk to your innovation hub, to your chief technical officer, depending on the hospital, right? I think that is key.
Can I ask a question, just particularly for Kieran here? So a lot of the things you've talked about are about infrastructure and track records and a lot of those aspects, right? How do you assess the likely sort of scientific, not quite validity, but almost like the scientific sort of excitement of something that's put forward? So how do you say, gosh, we think this idea looks really, really at the front of the queue, and this is definitely what we want to invest in? Do you get internal peer review? Do you get external peer review? How does that work?
Judging by what I've seen in GE, I think if you look at the centers where across the world where we got most deeply involved, in Boston, San Francisco, Chicago, Milwaukee, Vanderbilt, in Nashville, Tennessee, Cambridge, Oxford, Manchester, I think the relationships are very important. There is a long-standing track record of a relationship between that center and GE in this case. We also, of course, are inundated all of the time with people looking for attention, looking for funding, and from our point of view, the science and the academic credentials are one part of this. The reputation for sensible use of funded projects is the other one. And generally speaking, we look for things that are co-funded, whereas it's not just simply begging of us to pursue a project. And we look to work with people where we understand that this will be equitably funded, equal commitment, shared success, shared outcome. And I think that requires experience on both sides. And what one sees frequently is, and I think it's where management come in. I mentioned the one in Nashville, that conversation, which was very unusual, started between myself and the CEO of the hospital, which is very unusual. But that was because we both committed to funding something relating to the use of very similar to this, actually, genomic radiomic integration. And so, I think that it's reputation really matters on both sides. a sense of longevity and a long-term commitment, because there's an understanding that this won't succeed overnight. There will be, roadblocks. There may be a need to pivot. There may be a need to refocus. And I think the relationships really matter, and the commitment to have a team on the ground. And we can talk about that a little bit more possibly later.
Okay, so I was going to move on to a question about examples of success, but we've got a question onto the chat room section. I'll probably bring those in to try and to bring out aspects of that. So can I pass over to Alex Samoshkin? Are you there, and are you able to ask your question yourself? If not, I can read it out. But Alex, if you're there, please speak now.
Yes, hello. Thanks, Evis and Kieran, for nice discussions, and James for your sharing this session. So I just wonder, what is your opinion on open source development tools and use in clinic? Because it seems to me, or it's some researchers sees it as a potential way of democratizing different platforms and use it across different manufacturers, different companies. What is your view on that? Thank you.
You want to go first, Evis?
Yes. So I mean, I think in the space of imaging, it's a lot of, at least I feel there's a lot of open source. It's not necessarily you can use it for decision support. So it's a lot of open source. You can use it to a point of facilitating your research. Let's say look at the various segmentation tools or other. But when it comes to really provide decision support, there is no many open source, or at least I'm aware of. But please do educate me if I'm missing an important one. So I think there's a difference between open source for just to make your research or your workflow better in terms of research, and a different thing to have an open source for actually clinical decision support, what we're trying to do. So I'm all for the open source, for certain tools, but I don't think actually the open source will really get us to patient care. I mean, I don't know, Kieran, if you have a bit more experience than me.
Well, no, not really. I think at the end of the day, these things have to provide some sort of return over time. That it's not going to come free, and I think the democratization happens, and this is kind of, again, my sort of layman post proper job view. Basically, all the industrial companies need this to become widely applied. Volume is everything, and anything we can do to democratize, to have a broader distribution, that's helpful. But of course, ultimately, these things have to be reimbursed. They have the revenues that come from that reimbursement, whether it's in a private or a public sector application, that has to result in a return to the academic medical center and to the industrial company. Otherwise, the music stops at some point.
I mean, the other thing I found with some of the open source softwares, the support stops, and then you've used it, and then you're like, just of a sudden, you're like, what we're going to do now. So I think, it's great to have that, but I just think it's a fine balance, if you want to get it really to decision support.
Okay. Thank you for that. We've also got a question from Penny in Manchester. Penny, are you there? Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for the interesting discussion. Yeah, I was wondering if, in your opinion, commercial partnerships are always necessary for translational into clinical practice, particularly in the NHS, and particularly in relation to imaging biomarkers. And I was wondering if you feel that academics are aware of the pathways that are available in order to to support that translation. And at the beginning of their research and when they're aiming to translate into clinical practice, do they understand what options are there? Thanks.
Kieran, do you want to go first on this, or do you want me to?
So I probably don't have enough experience to answer this question.
So, I mean, so, I think, Penny, I think I said at the beginning, I think the first thing is that you don't have to collaborate all the time in the industry to get something done. Yes, if there are other avenues to do that, and if you think that's the better path, that's absolutely fine. However, nevertheless, I find that if you really have a focus problem, in order to move it fast, I mean, please do give me an example of something that is gone from research to clinical without actually involving commercialization, or collaboration with. In terms of the data integration space, of course, there are plenty of examples that you actually, like, for example, in Cambridge Illumina is one of them, that you've got your spin-off out of Cambridge and then you commercialize it. So that is something you don't have to work with the industry, but not to the data integration space when you have actually involved several, elements, several data elements. So, so I think if your idea, actually it doesn't involve several data elements or several kind of domains, I think maybe you don't really have to collaborate with industry necessarily, but if it does in the space of data integration, I think you're bound to get that to the patients through a collaboration.
Thank you. Kieran, did you want to add anything?
Penny, what do you think? I mean, do you have any, actually, let me just turn it out this way. What is your suggestion?
Oh, no, well, not really a suggestion, but I've just looking at the options available in terms of assessment programs through NICE, for instance. So the diagnostic assessment programs and the medical technologies assessment programs, they seem to anticipate commercial partnerships in order to allow that, allow it to move it through the process of assessment. And I just wonder if that really was the only way in order to allow that to happen. Bar changing guidelines, I guess, which is another.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I said, I think more, we see more and more, and I think that's the way to go to moving forward, to sort of do the multi-source sort of data integration for anything really. If you in the oncology, well, not just in oncology, actually, cardiac and other things, in terms of the biomarkers. So I think there, even if you go through the HTRV, NIHR, you really have to have your partner to commercialize. What's your way to commercialization? If you don't, I can tell you it will take years if
yeah,
really possible to do that. I mean, Kieran, what do you think?
Well, I mean, from my point of view, ultimately, to get something distributed, you need some sort of commercial collaboration. And without something being widely distributed, it ends up being used in a very small population of patients. And, that's okay. But as I mentioned before, if you're staring into an infinite space and you pick out one thing, the chances are that, it will get lost or meander over the ensuing couple of years. So I'm a believer that the commercial companies have a very strong role here, particularly on distribution, putting these things on a platform. And the economics of that will make a lot more sense over time. But of course, we're in the early stages right now. This is like having the first 100 apps available on the Apple platform. Ultimately, we need to get to many thousands, but you need the platform.
Yeah.
So
I mean, of course, one thing I want to add, Penny, is that of course there is a route that through the spin out, spin off. You get to a certain point that you got to acquire from a bigger. That's another route. So, rather than the collaboration straight at the beginning. So.
I would say for the spin out route is definitely a good one. We could have a whole other session on spin outs and what makes them successful and not. The environment for doing spin outs, I would say, in the next in the near term is really pretty tough, which makes these collaborations even more important.
And I think I just make the point that from a sort of academic point of view, there's so many people who work in these sort of areas around, say, imaging biomarker science, and clearly the vast majority of work that people do will not get anywhere near an industry product or a tool that's used in clinical practice. So when we look at, those who've been to RSMRM recently, for the many thousands of abstracts per year, most of them will go nowhere, and that's just reality. So I think so we need to realize that a lot of the imaging science is in that sort of space, but it doesn't mean that you can't have some sort of vision as to where the successful imaging biomarker might go to and the steps that will need to be taken. And I don't personally feel that many PIs have much of a sense of how they would get, if they start to get successful biomarkers, how they take it from getting those papers in clinical cancer research or somewhere pretty good any further. And people often just tend to stop at that point and then go and work on something else. So taking it through not only all the multi-center translation, but also then getting that involvement, say, from industry. A lot of people don't really have any clue how you do that. And of course, NCETA is looking very much at multi-center translation, but this webinar particularly looking at the commercial aspect. And I think something we do urgently need is a much clearer sense of what the mechanisms are in place for that, should we be successful. I think if you parallel this, say, to drug development, most of the candidates people look at won't get through to market, but there's much more of a structure in place, both in the infrastructure, but also I think mentally, that the successful candidates have a route to get to market. We don't know which ones those are going to be necessarily, but I think there's a sense of how you do it. And I don't really think with imaging there's anywhere near as much sense that is widely disseminated in that community. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Kieran and Evis.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it will evolve. That's what needs to happen, frankly. And the leading imaging companies are all trying to work on platforms to allow that sort of formula to evolve, where these things can become distributed in the way that drugs get distributed through pharma companies. The day of the real blockbuster biomarker within an imaging context, I think, is a long way off by comparison. You see a little bit of it in vitro diagnostics, and I think in vitro diagnostics kind of went through some of this pain, and ultimately what it leads to is industry consolidation, and laboratories established. Maybe that's what will happen here as well in due course, but I think that's quite a long way off. Short term, I think the imaging companies will be the people to distribute these. That would be my view. I'm not sure if you think that, Evis.
No, I mean, I completely agree. And if I may kind of go back a little bit of how you started this particular point, James, of, you go to ISMRM and there are a lot of abstracts and it's great, because it just, however, we do in the imaging side have a bit of a disconnect. And I mean, the whole ISMRM point is to actually connect the clinicians with the physicists and AI world, but I think it's still quite disconnected compared to the oncology, for example, with the basic science and the clinical are a bit more connected.
Yeah.
I think ultimately I think we should think, how do we build value? So we should start I want to build value on this, and then walk backwards and then link with the basic, our counterpart of basic science, the AI, the engineers, the AI physicists, and I think that part we're actually lagging behind compared to pharma. I don't know if you would agree with that, Kieran.
Yes.
So we do a lot of, for the sake of an abstract, we do a lot of work, and wow, look at that, and you think like, well, ultimately I reached the same diagnosis with your images 5 years ago.
So can I just make the point, if anyone's got a burning question to ask, please do so now, really, because we're going to finish in a few minutes. Perhaps to start to draw us to a bit of a close, I maybe ask each of you, what, you're not allowed to say your own work, okay, is there anything that's caught your eye in the last year or two that you think might be the next big example of big success for industry academia partnership, ideally in imaging cancer biomarkers? But Kieran, I'll let you go a bit broader if necessary as a non-imager, but maybe start with Evis first.
Gosh, that's tough. I think what is kind of caught my eye is that now in general there is a tendency of actually the imaging companies to actually get more in the space of sort of integrated care, not just GE is or Siemens or it's like an imaging company or imaging. No, this and I think it's great that they've kind of shifted that. And then you'd see the partnership, not necessarily acquiring company, but partnering with the genomic companies. So that to me is fantastic, because that the frame of mind, and this being the genomic space, the radiotherapy space, the frame has shifted into patient in the center, not just imaging and this, but ultimately coming to the patient. So I think that is a big thing that we're going to see, or maybe not exploding, but maybe this is how we're going to see the future evolving.
Okay, great. And Kieran, anything else to?
I see the emergence of companies like Sophia Genetics, for those who are, maybe want to look that up, and what they are trying to do in working with, radiology, in working with hospitals, trying to drill into databases, draw up trends, really analyze incidence of disease, and how that can relate to finding candidates for clinical trials and so on. I would say, generally speaking, the use of this integrated approach to really help find the right patients for these immune related drugs. That's a big thing, and I think companies like Sophia are really companies of that type are really worth keeping an eye on. I'm not a shareholder in Sophia, and I'm not a representative of them in any way, by the way.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, I think I might draw it to a close. And so I think that's been a very interesting discussion, and I think it's one which we need to be having more of these sorts of discussions going forward if we're going to really make much of a difference with translating a lot of this biomarker science into the clinic. So thank you very much to both of you. And I'll just pass back now to Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. So yeah, just a couple of things from me. Thank you ever so much for attending. Thank you, Evis, Kieran, James, for such an interesting discussion. Just put a couple of things in the chat. So firstly, feedback form, if you do have the time, please do complete it. It's always very valuable to get any feedback, especially to feed into our future lectures. Secondly, the next lecture is taking place on the 19th of July. 11 till 12. This is with Professor Tom Treasure. The lecture will be on striving for evidence with and without a randomized controlled trial. So please do see further information on the chat and register if of interest. And that's everything from me. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
All the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.